This man is in his 30s and lives with his blind father. His mother left when he was a baby. One day, the police call and tell him his mother's skeletal remains have been found. She didn't disappear, she died decades ago. And now, the police suspect it was not an accident. This is the story of the ugly. Dongwon lives a quiet life with his blind father. To him, this has always been enough. His father, Young-gu, may be blind, but his hands are precise. He is a master stamp engraver, known by others as a living miracle. When Dongwon persuades him to appear in a documentary filmed by Soo-jin, it is not for fame, but to preserve the craft his father has spent a lifetime perfecting. As Soo-jin interviews Young-gu, Dongwon watches from a distance, filled with quiet pride. But the mood shifts when Soo-jin notices a scar on Young-gu's hand. When she asks about it, he avoids the question completely, brushing it aside as if the past is something better left untouched. That night, Young-gu tells his son that he is not interested in appearing on television. Before Dongwon can respond, his phone rings. It is the police. They tell him they have found his birth mother's skeletal remains. Dongwon is stunned. As far as he knew, his mother had simply abandoned them long ago. At the morgue, the truth settles in. Her bones were discovered buried deep in the mountains, along with her identification. After 40 years, the exact cause of death can no longer be determined, but one thing is clear. Someone must have buried her there. Later, Dongwon holds a funeral for his late mom. There is no photo on the altar. He never knew her face. There, he asks his father about his mother one more time. Young-gu only says that he came home one day, and she was gone. When Dongwon asks if anyone had reason to hurt her, his father answers quietly that she was a kind person, and leaves it at that. Soo-jin attends the funeral and offers her sympathy for the sudden loss. Even so, she softly reminds Dongwon that the documentary must continue. Before he can respond, strangers arrive, his mother's sisters and nephews. He has never seen them before and does not know how to greet them, but the real reason they came was because his maternal grandfather has died, leaving an inheritance meant for Young-hee. But they refuse to share it. They say she ran away from home as a child and does not deserve it. Dongwon is disappointed, but he does not argue. Then they reveal the reason she left. Young-hee once caught her father having an affair. When she exposed it, her mother struck her. That was the day she ran away and never returned. Then, Dongwon asks for a photograph of his mother, but they tell him they do not have one. Young-hee hated having her picture taken, because she was ugly. Dongwon freezes at the words. At another table, Soo-jin listens in silence. Meanwhile, Soo-jin is visibly excited, and even wants to shift the documentary angle to talk about Young-hee. She believes it will make the documentary stronger. Dongwon feels uneasy hearing this, but he says nothing. Later, the family is taken to where Young-hee's skeletal remains are being examined. The air is heavy. Her sisters grow impatient and complain about the smell, urging Dongwon to hurry. When he does not respond, one of them moves abruptly, knocking into the table. The remains spill to the ground. Soon after, Soo-jin calls him. She says she has found the place where his mother worked before she disappeared, a tailor shop called Blue Wind Cloth. Some former workers still remember Young-hee, and Soo-jin asks him along for the meetup. The next day, he goes to meet her. When he arrives, he sees her slip a small hidden camera into her bag. He realizes this meeting is meant for her documentary, but he chooses to follow her anyway. They meet the former workers at a cafe where Soo-jin introduces herself. As the conversation unfolds, the workers explain that Young-hee stopped coming to work one day. One of them casually mentions that her nickname at the factory had been Dung. Hearing this, Dongwon feels a quiet discomfort settle in, but he continues listening. They begin recalling what Young-hee's life at the factory had been like. She was often given the odd jobs, constantly ordered around, and regularly mocked by both her co-workers and supervisors. Even using the restroom required permission, and one day she was only allowed a minute. But since there was a queue at the restroom, she ended up soiling herself. Instead of offering help or sympathy, the others laughed at her, and from that day on, the nickname followed her. The workers say they never thought much of her disappearance and believed she had simply left on her own. However, one of them hesitates and recalls an incident involving the factory owner Bak, before suggesting that Soo-jin speak to a woman named Jin-suk for more details. Before they part ways, they also mention that Bak used to take identification photos for the workers, and if any photograph of Young-hee still exists, it may be in his possession. Dongwon leaves the cafe with a growing sense that his mother's past and her final days may have been far more painful than he ever imagined. After the interview, Soo-jin calls one of her seniors and asks for help to track down the owner of a clothing factory from 40 years ago. When Dongwon hears this, he tells her she should not interfere, saying this is a family matter, and that he wants to continue the search on his own. However, Soo-jin insists that the truth needs to be uncovered. The next day, Dong-hwan and Soo-jin visit Jin-suk, who was the seamstress at the factory. One evening, Young-hee found Jin-suk crying, and it was then that Jin-suk revealed the truth she had been hiding. She told Young-hee that their boss, Bak, had sexually assaulted her. On the outside, he appeared kind and respectable, a man people trusted, but behind closed doors he was a monster. The following day at work, the factory manager announced that since Jin-suk did not show up, they would hire someone new. When Young-hee tried to speak up for her, the manager told her to mind her own business. Unable to accept this, Young-hee stormed into Baek's office and confronted him about what he had done to Jin-suk. Instead of listening, Baek had her chased out. That night, Young-hee wrote messages on sheets of paper, exposing Bak for sexually assaulting women, and scattered them throughout the market. When Bak arrived at the factory the next morning, whispers spread quickly. People avoided him, watching from a distance. Furious, Bak lashed out at the manager for failing to control the workers, and then turned his anger toward Young-hee, firing her on the spot. But minutes later, Jin-suk arrived and slapped her. Even though she knew Young-hee had only tried to help, she could not bear the attention. She felt that because of Young-hee, she had to face that shame and scrutiny. But now looking back, Jin-suk believes that if Baek was responsible for Young-hee's death, then she too carries part of the blame. Hearing this, both Soo-jin and Dong-hwan are deeply shaken. Soo-jin says they need to meet Baek and force him to face what he has done, convinced that it is time for him to pay for his sins. They go to Baek's house together. When they head in, they find an old man lying in bed, struggling to sit up. The air inside is thick with a foul stench, and the walls are covered with obscene photographs of women, making the place feel suffocating. Soo-jin bribes him with money and asks if he remembers a woman named Young-hee, telling him that the statute of limitations has long passed, and that even if he was the one who killed her, he would not be convicted. Baek listens, then laughs weakly, and says something neither of them expects. He asks whether the man who killed her was ever caught. When Soo-jin presses him, Baek answers without hesitation that it was Young-hee's blind husband who killed her. The story shifts back to the past. Bak once proudly introduced Young-gu to his friends, praising him as a master stamp engraver who could carve seals from scratch within minutes despite being blind. But as the night went on and the men drank more, Bak's tone changed. He complained that Young-hee had been causing trouble for him. Then, without warning, he poured beer over Young-gu's head and mocked him, calling him ungrateful. Young-gu burned with anger, but there was nothing he could do except endure the humiliation in silence. Then, later that night, Young-hee and Young-gu headed home together. On the way, they were surrounded by thugs acting on Bak's orders. The men beat Young-hee mercilessly as punishment, while Young-gu could do nothing to protect her except beg them to stop. When the thugs finally left, he crawled toward his wife and felt relief when he heard her faint breathing. But the next day, Young-hee went straight to Bak's office and attacked him in a rage, but she was quickly restrained and dragged away. Furious, Baek ordered his men to get rid of her and make sure they finished the job properly this time. But instead, they witnessed something unexpected. Deep in the forest, they saw Young-gu carrying Young-hee's lifeless body, and then he threw her down a cliff before turning and making his way back home alone. Because her body had not been buried, Bak's men even helped to bury Young-hee. Back in the present, Dong-hwan is shaken by what he has just heard. His emotions rise quickly, and he accuses Bak of lying. Soo-jin tries to calm him down, telling him that anger will not uncover the truth, but this triggers Dong-hwan even further. He grabs her hidden camera, takes it from her bag, and leaves without another word. When he gets home, Dong-hwan confronts his father. He tells him that he met a man named Bak, and then asks him directly whether he killed his mother. To Dong-hwan's shock, Young-go does not deny it. Instead, he calmly asks why he should not have killed her. Young-go begins to explain. He says that as a child he was constantly mocked for being blind, and life felt cruel and unbearable. Even so, he taught himself to carve seals and tried to survive by selling them on the street. When Bak noticed his talent, Young-go believed he had finally been recognized. But that hope quickly faded. No matter how skilled he was, people still looked down on him because he was blind. Then one day, Young-hee stopped at his stall. She spoke to him kindly, and because she was his first customer, he told her he would give her the seal for free. When he finished carving it, she praised his work. From that day on, she returned often to bring him lunch. For the first time in his life, someone treated him with genuine care. When other shop owners noticed them together, they teased him, saying he should not miss the chance to marry such a beautiful woman. Eventually, they got married with the neighboring merchants as witnesses. Soon after, Dong-hwan was born. Life was difficult, and money was always tight, but despite everything, they were content. One night, Young-gu's closest friend stopped by to visit him for drinks, and saw Young-hee. Young-gu told him that he was the luckiest man in the world to have married such a beautiful and kind wife, but said he did not have the fortune to see her face. That was when his friend laughed and told him it was better that way, saying that his wife looked like a monster. In that moment, Young-gu realized the truth. The merchants who had encouraged his marriage were never happy for him. They were mocking all along. The humiliation sank deep, and something inside him began to twist. He had lived his entire life being mocked for his disability, but being ugly felt more humiliating to him. Slowly that bitterness turned into resentment, and he began to wish that Young-hee would simply disappear. That same night he told Young-hee to stop getting involved with President Baek, warning her that she could never win against someone like him. But she refused to listen. She told him that she had been blamed and looked down on since she was a child because she was ugly, and that she had learned to accept it as her fate. Still, she said that the kindness Young-gu had shown her gave her the courage to stand up to those who hurt others. When Young-gu heard the word ugly again, something inside him broke. Overcome by anger and shame, he pressed his hand over her mouth, and she scratched his hand trying to break free. In that moment of uncontrolled fury, he killed her by accident. Because he was blind, he believed no one had witnessed what he had done, and he convinced himself that the truth would remain hidden forever. Back in the present, Young-gu asks Dong-hwan if he understands his reasons. He tells his son that everything he did was to protect him, that he only wanted to pass on good things and spare him from pain. Dong-hwan listens, then pushes his father away, saying that he understands nothing except that his father is a murderer. Afterward, Dong-hwan meets Sujin to return her camera. She says she knows he must be shaken, having respected his father all his life. Dong-hwan tells her that he deleted what he believed were unnecessary clips, and tells her to proceed with the documentary, hoping she will do her job well. Even though he cannot accept his father's actions, he decides to bury the truth, believing that exposing it would only destroy his father's name. Sujin tells him that he is no different from Young-gu, someone who believes only beautiful things deserve to be shown. Before leaving, she tells Dong-hwan that after she left that day, she managed to get a photo of his mother from Bok, and hands him an envelope. With trembling hands, Dong-hwan opens it and sees a photograph of his mother for the first time in his life. As he looks at her face, he realizes that she was never ugly, not in the way the world had claimed she was. Overcome with emotion, he breaks down, carrying the weight of grief, guilt, and the knowledge that the justice she deserved will never come.